But I want to start with something that might seem like a small story buried under the avalanche of everything else that happened this weekend. Stay with me on this. On March 9th, there was an explosion over a residential neighborhood on Sitra Island in Bahrain. 32 people were injured, including children. The United States Central Command immediately said on social media that it was an Iranian drone attack on a residential neighborhood. Iran did this, another Iranian attack on civilians, and the headlines moved on. But here is what actually happened. An independent analysis by the Middlebury Institute of International Studies, published just this past Friday, concluded with what they called moderate to high confidence that the explosion was caused not by an Iranian drone, but by a US-operated Patriot interceptor missile launched from a battery in Riffa, Bahrain, that detonated mid-air over civilian homes. It was friendly fire. The system designed to protect civilians is the thing that hit them. And Bahrain, quietly, without a press conference, acknowledged that a Patriot missile was involved. They framed it as a successful interception that saved lives. But the damage was to their own neighborhood, from their own allied defense system. Now, I am telling you about this not because it is the biggest story of the weekend. It is not. I am telling you about this because it is a microcosm, a tiny, perfect distillation of everything that is going wrong in this war as it enters what is now genuinely its most dangerous phase. The weapons meant to protect are causing harm. The systems people were told would keep them safe are failing. And the official story, when you scratch the surface, does not match what actually happened on the ground. Hold that thought. Here is the thing about where we are right now. This war, the one the United States and Israel launched against Iran on February 28th, is now in its 4th week. And in the last 72 hours, this conflict crossed a threshold that even the most hawkish voices were not willing to talk about 2 weeks ago, let alone 4. The word is nuclear. On Saturday, Iran struck the city of Dimona and the nearby town of Arad in southern Israel. Now, Iran did not hit the Shimon Peres Nuclear Research Center itself, the reactor complex that sits about 8 miles from town. What they hit were the residential areas surrounding it. 64 people were wounded in Dimona alone. Multiple residential buildings were destroyed. In Arad, the injuries pushed the combined total to roughly 180 people. Here is why that matters more than any other missile strike in this war so far. That research center in Dimona is not just another military installation. It was opened in 1958 in a secret collaboration with France. It is the facility that supplied Israel with its first 13 nuclear weapons. The uranium was produced there. This is the birthplace of Israel's nuclear deterrent, the single most important security asset in the country's existence. And Iran just dropped ballistic missiles into the neighborhoods where the people who work at that facility live. Iran's message was not subtle. Iranian state television framed the Dimona strike explicitly as payback for a reported American and Israeli attack on Iran's Natanz nuclear enrichment facility that same day. And here is the tit for tat that has security analysts around the world losing sleep tonight. The United States bombed Natanz at the start of this war. They bombed it again on Saturday. In response, Iran hit the town surrounding Israel's most sensitive nuclear site. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed no radiation leak from Natanz, and thankfully no damage to the Dimona reactor either. But whether Iran's uranium enrichment has actually been stopped remains unknown. So what we now have, for the first time in this conflict, is both sides actively striking at or near the other's nuclear infrastructure. The escalation ladder just skipped 3 rungs. And this is where it gets complicated in a way that should genuinely concern everyone watching. There is a concept in Israeli strategic doctrine called the Samson Option, named after the biblical figure who pulled down the temple pillars on himself and his enemies rather than accept defeat. The idea is straightforward and terrifying if Israel ever faces what it considers a grave existential threat, a moment when its survival as a state is genuinely in question. It reserves the right to use nuclear weapons as a last resort. Not against a nuclear adversary. Israel is the only nuclear-armed state in its region. Against a conventional one. Now, is Iran's strike on Dimona an existential threat? No, not in itself. But it creates a strategic dilemma that has no clean answer. If Israel does not respond forcefully to a strike near its most sacred nuclear facility, then Iran's deterrence message is validated. They are essentially saying, we can reach you anywhere, even the places you thought were untouchable, and you have no answer. If that perception takes hold, Israel's entire security posture is weakened. But if Israel responds with disproportionate force, if it reaches for something more extreme, the international consequences would be immediate and severe. NATO allies, Gulf states, every country that has been looking the other way, they would have to respond. Israel would find itself isolated in ways it has never experienced. This is the trap, and there is no easy way out of it. Now, remember that Patriot missile in Bahrain? Remember how the system designed to intercept threats instead hit a residential neighborhood? Scale that failure up. The Speaker of Iran's parliament said after the Dimona strikes that if Israel failed to intercept those missiles at one of the most heavily defended sites in the entire country, it is, and I am paraphrasing here, operationally a sign that Israeli skies are defenseless. The Israel Defense Forces spokesperson said Israel has maintained a 92% interception rate across more than 400 ballistic missiles fired in 22 days of war. 92% sounds impressive until you realize that 8% of 400 is 32 missiles that got through, and the ones that got through hit Dimona, they hit Arad, they have hit Tel Aviv. Iran appears to have been holding its larger, more capable missiles in reserve. And what we are seeing now, according to multiple analysts, is that they are beginning to deploy them strategically, picking targets that carry maximum symbolic and psychological weight. Here is where it gets worse. So while Iran is demonstrating that it can strike anywhere in Israel, while the nuclear word is being used for the first time in this conflict, while the air defense systems that the world was told were impenetrable are clearly not, Donald Trump decided to issue an ultimatum. On Saturday night, on Truth Social, the President of the United States posted this: "If Iran does not fully open, without threat, the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours, the United States of America will hit and obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first." 48 hours, that deadline expires roughly Monday evening, Washington time. Here is the thing about this ultimatum. It operates on what appears to be a fundamental misunderstanding. Trump seems to believe the Strait of Hormuz is completely closed. It is not. Iran has stated repeatedly that the strait is open, just not for ships allied with the United States and Israel. Vessels from non-allied nations have been crossing, some by paying fees, some by conducting transactions in Chinese yuan. Iranian-friendly nations pass freely. What Iran has done is not shut down the strait, it has selectively weaponized access to it, which is in many ways a more sophisticated and harder to counter strategy. And then there is the operational question. Trump threatened to destroy Iran's electricity grid. Iran has a decentralized power structure, over 400 separate plants spread across the country. You would not knock out the grid by hitting one plant, even the biggest one. It would take a sustained, massive air campaign against hundreds of individual targets. And Iran knows this, which is why, within 3 hours of Trump's threat, Iran responded with what they are calling a triple retaliation doctrine. If the United States attacks Iranian civilian power infrastructure, Iran says it will do 3 things. 1, destroy the energy infrastructure of every Gulf state allied with the US and Israel. 2, attack information technology infrastructure in the region, specifically naming data centers and offices belonging to companies like Amazon and Microsoft. And 3, target desalination plants across the Gulf. That third one deserves a pause. 90% of the drinking water in the Gulf states, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, comes from desalination. These are countries that turn seawater into the foundation of their modern civilizations. Attack those plants, and you are not disrupting an economy. You are threatening the survival of entire populations. And this is not an abstract threat. Iran has already demonstrated this capability. When an Israeli drone struck facilities at Iran's Asaluye complex, damaging plants connected to the South Pars gas field, Iran retaliated by hitting Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial city. The result, according to Qatar Energy's own CEO, was that 17% of Qatar's liquefied natural gas export capacity was knocked offline. Repairs are estimated to take 3 to 5 years. The damaged units cost about $26 billion to build. So when Iran says it will target desalination plants if its power grid is attacked, this is not bluster. They have the precedent and the capability. And the World Health Organization has already weighed in, stating that humanity has set the stage for self-annihilation. Now, here is where I need you to hold multiple contradictory things in your head at the same time, because that is what this war requires. On the same day that Trump talked about winding down military operations, US bombers struck Natanz. On the same day that Trump posted he was not putting troops troops anywhere, the Pentagon confirmed that roughly 4,500 Marines and sailors are surging toward the Persian Gulf. The 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit departed San Diego aboard the USS Boxer, USS Comstock, and USS Portland. Deployment accelerated ahead of schedule. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, normally based in Okinawa, Japan, the only permanently forward deployed Marine unit in the entire Pacific, was pulled out of the Indo-Pacific and redirected to the Gulf aboard the USS Tripoli. That second deployment, by the way, leaves a gap in American military presence in the Pacific at a time when China is watching very carefully. Defense experts at Stars and Stripes have warned that this gap will not be easily filled. And these Marines are not heading to the Gulf for a freedom of navigation exercise. An Israeli official told the Washington Post directly, quote, "Those Marines are not coming for decoration." The same official said the deployment signals a plan to, quote, "take the island and the strait," referring to Karg Island, a small island 15 miles off the Iranian coast, through which roughly 90% of Iran's petroleum exports flow. Lindsey Graham said it out loud on Fox News Sunday. "Keep it up for a few more weeks. Take Karg Island, where all of the resources they have to produce oil, control that island, let this regime die on a vine." A source with knowledge of White House thinking told Axios the administration believes it needs about a month to weaken the Iranians further with strikes, take the island, and then, and this is their language, get them by the balls and use it for negotiations. Military experts have warned that seizing Karg Island could require taking miles of Iranian coastline and holding it indefinitely. Iran has been planning the asymmetric defense of this strait for decades. The IRGC issued a statement saying it is, and this is from Iran's Mehr news agency, impatiently waiting for the Marines and is prepared to give them a close-up view of naval surprises. So let me just lay out the timeline of contradictions from the past 72 hours. Thursday, Trump floats winding down the war. Friday, the Pentagon accelerates Marine deployments. Saturday morning, US and Israel bomb Natanz again. Saturday afternoon, Iran strikes Dimona and Arad. Saturday night, Trump issues a 48-hour ultimatum to obliterate Iran's power plants. Sunday, Iran responds with its triple retaliation threat. Also Sunday, the Pentagon is asking Congress for over $200 billion to fund this war. Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska said, "This is now at a completely different level than what had been advertised to us as members of Congress." Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina, a Republican, said on ABC that it is a real problem that he and others do not know what the U.S. objective actually is. Representative Thomas Massey of Kentucky asked how long they plan to be there, what are the goals. Is this the first $200 billion? $1 billion a day. That is what this bombing campaign is costing. And Congress was never asked to approve it. And here is where the loneliness of America's position in this war becomes impossible to ignore. When Trump asked NATO allies to help secure the Strait of Hormuz, the answer from nearly every major power was no. Germany said, and I want you to hear this, as long as this war continues, there will be no involvement, not even in an option to keep the Strait of Hormuz open by military means. France's Macron said France did not choose this war and will not take part in operations to open the strait in the current context. The United Kingdom's Starmer said Britain will not be drawn in. Spain said no. Italy said no. Estonia said no. Australia, South Korea, Japan all said no. Trump called NATO a paper tiger, called them cowards. Later, 5 large European nations and Japan offered a conditional statement, essentially saying they would consider helping secure the strait only after a truce is established and a multilateral coalition is formed. 22 countries signed a vague joint declaration about safe passage. The UAE expressed willingness to join a US-led effort, but emphasized that it had tried to avoid this war from the beginning. But the core reality is this: the United States and Israel started this war. And now, entering week 4, America's traditional allies are saying this is not our fight. Meanwhile, the human cost continues to mount. According to Iran's health ministry, approximately 1,500 people have been killed in Iran, including 208 children. In Lebanon, Israeli strikes have killed more than 1,000 people since March 2nd, with the UN reporting the equivalent of 1 classroom of children killed or wounded every single day. UNICEF's numbers as of March 12th showed over 1,100 children injured or killed across the region. And here is the part that defies all irony. Israel, which is now protesting Iran's use of cluster munitions against Israeli civilians, and rightly so, those are terrible weapons that are inherently indiscriminate. This is the same country that used white phosphorus in Lebanon, the same country whose military campaign in Gaza killed over 50,000 people, including roughly 16,000 children. When you have used those weapons and caused those casualties, and then you turn around and say the other side is targeting civilians with banned weapons, the world notices the dissonance. The G7 issued a statement this weekend demanding an immediate and unconditional cessation of all attacks by the Iranian regime, just Iran, as if Iran started this war. As if Iran assassinated the supreme leader and his inner circle. As if Iran bombed first. The statement expressed support for countries unjustifiably attacked by Iran to defend themselves. Not a word asking both sides to resolve the conflict, not a suggestion that the countries that launched the war bear any responsibility for the escalation. These are the nations that lecture the world about democracy, about rules-based international order, and they cannot bring themselves to say that both sides need to stop. Now, what does Iran actually want? Because Iran is not negotiating in the traditional sense. Iran is setting terms. First, an ironclad guarantee against future attacks, not a ceasefire, a permanent assurance that this will never happen again. Second, and this is the one that makes diplomats go pale, a complete withdrawal of US military forces from the Middle East and the closure of all American bases in the region. If that happened, it would effectively end American military dominance in the Gulf and strike at the foundations of the petrodollar system that has underpinned US economic power for half a century. Third, reparations. Full compensation from the United States and Israel for all damage inflicted during the war. Now, there is a potential compromise being discussed. Unfreezing Iran's blocked accounts in Western banks. Iran could present this domestically as reparations, as penalty payments. The West could frame it as a goodwill measure. But a full US withdrawal from the Gulf remains almost unimaginable to anyone who understands the architecture of American power. So where does this go? The 48-hour Hormuz deadline is the immediate flashpoint. That is Monday evening, US time. If it expires without Iran opening the strait to all traffic, Trump has publicly committed to obliterating Iran's power infrastructure. And Iran has publicly committed to a triple retaliation. Ramadan ended this weekend. Multiple analysts have noted that Iran was fighting defensively through the holy month. That restraint may now lift. The Marines are days away from having live options for ground operations in the Gulf. Karg Island seizure planning is actively underway. But Israeli and American officials have now acknowledged to the Washington Post that the original war objectives, regime change in Tehran and permanently ending Iran's nuclear weapons capability, appear to be out of reach. The endgame, such as it is, has narrowed to Hormuz and energy. Meanwhile, the war has already cost at least 2,500 lives across the region. Oil is above $100 a barrel and climbing. Gas in America hit $3.94 a gallon on Sunday, up more than $1 since the war started. Goldman Sachs is projecting these elevated prices could persist through 2027. Asian markets crashed on Monday morning. The Nikkei down 3.5%. South Korea's index down 6.5%. And there is one historical parallel I want to leave you with tonight, because I think it matters. In Vietnam, the United States believed that sustained bombing would break the population's will. That if you hit them hard enough and long enough, the people would turn against their government and the resistance would collapse. Instead, the bombing united the Vietnamese population against the United States. The harder America hit, the stronger the resolve became. Anti-government sentiment existed in Vietnam. The bombing did not amplify it. It replaced it with something far more powerful, a collective fury against the foreign power destroying their country. There was considerable anger against the regime in Iran before this war started. The protests of 2022 showed that. Women fighting for basic rights, young people demanding change. But you cannot bomb a population into loving you. You cannot kill 208 of a nation's children and expect their parents to welcome your vision of liberation. Every bomb dropped on Iranian soil is not weakening the regime. It is handing the regime exactly what it needs, a foreign enemy so brutal that internal grievances become irrelevant. The Pentagon has analysts. They do war games. They study history. Someone in that building knows what happened in Vietnam. Someone in that building knows that this path has been walked before, and it ends the same way every time. But here we are, entering week 4, with a 48-hour deadline ticking down, with thousands of Marines heading toward a strait that Iran has spent decades preparing to defend, with nuclear facilities on both sides now in play, with America's closest allies refusing to join, with a $200 billion price tag and no clear objective, and with a president who says he is winding down the war on the same day he threatens threatens to obliterate an entire country's power grid, I started tonight with a Patriot missile in Bahrain, a system built to protect people that instead hit the people it was supposed to defend. No one was supposed to know. The official story was that Iran did it, but the evidence said otherwise. That is where we are in this war. The official story says one thing, the evidence says something else entirely. And the distance between those two things is where the danger lives. We will keep tracking all of this. There is a lot more ahead. Stay with us.